I still remember the day everything changed. The day we realized that poking the humans had been the worst mistake in the 17,000-year history of the Krell Dominion. My name is Vexther, and I serve as a communications officer aboard the flagship Eternal Supremacy.
Well served.
Past tense. Because after what happened at Meridian Station, nothing in this galaxy would ever be the same again. Let me back up a bit. See, we Krell had been running this corner of space for longer than most species had been spacefaring. We were strong. We were advanced. We were frankly arrogant as hell. When we encountered new civilizations, we gave them two options: submit or be destroyed. Simple, effective. Nobody had ever really challenged us on it. Then came the humans. They showed up about 15 cycles ago, stumbling out of their little yellow star system in ships that looked like they'd been assembled by particularly ambitious children with access to welding equipment and delusions of grandeur. We laughed. Seriously, we actually laughed at them. Their first diplomatic envoy arrived at Krell Prime, and High Commander Zalthrex took one look at their representative, a short female with wild red hair named Kate Murphy, and dismissed them entirely. Your species will submit to Krell authorities, Zalthrex had declared. All four of his arms spread wide in what he thought was an intimidating gesture. You will provide tribute, grant us access to your systems, and serve the Dominion, or you will be eliminated. Kate Murphy had stared at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she'd smiled. Not a happy smile. The kind of smile that should have warned us. The kind that said, "Oh, you sweet summer child. You have no idea what you've just done." Counter-proposal, she'd said, her voice light and casual. How about you take your tribute demands, fold them until they're all sharp corners, and shove them somewhere anatomically improbable? The chamber had gone silent. Nobody spoke to the High Commander that way. Nobody. Zalthrex had made a gesture, and security had seized her. They'd thrown her in a detention cell. Standard procedure for insolent species. We'd expected the humans to come crawling back, ready to negotiate properly. Instead, Kate Murphy had picked the lock on her cell using a piece of wire she'd apparently hidden in her hair, knocked out 3 guards, stolen a security shuttle, and escaped the station. She'd transmitted one message before jumping out of the system: "See you soon, ugly." We should have paid attention to that. We really should have. 3 months later, the humans sent another envoy. This time to Meridian Station, a major trading hub on the edge of Krell space. The envoy's name was David Torres, and he was accompanied by a small security detail. Unlike Kate Murphy, Torres was polite, respectful, even. He'd asked for a meeting with Station Administrator Grellovok to discuss peaceful coexistence. Grellovok, being Grellovok, which is to say being an idiot, had decided to make an example of the humans. To show the rest of the galaxy what happened when you didn't immediately bow to Krell's superiority, he'd invited Torres and his team to a diplomatic dinner. Except instead of dinner, he'd activated the station's security forces, 30 armed Krell soldiers against 5 humans. It should have been a massacre. It was a massacre, just not the one we'd expected. The humans had apparently expected betrayal. They'd come prepared. Not with weapons, we'd scanned them thoroughly. But humans, we learned that day, don't really need weapons. They are weapons. Torres had grabbed a dinner knife and put it through Grellovok's primary eye before anyone could react. His security chief, a massive woman named Angela Briggs, had picked up a table and used it as a shield and battering ram simultaneously. Another human, a thin, wiry man called James Park, had somehow turned a decorative vase into a projectile weapon that shattered a soldier's helmet visor. But the real horror came from their medic, a quiet, soft-spoken man named Thomas Gray. Thomas Gray had been the last one anyone expected to be dangerous. He'd spent the entire walk to the dining hall talking about his daughter's birthday party and showing pictures of a cake shaped like some earth animal called a unicorn. Sweet guy. Friendly. Harmless. Thomas Gray had killed 14 Krell soldiers in approximately 90 seconds using nothing but his bare hands and an apparently encyclopedic knowledge of Krell anatomy. He'd moved through them like death itself, striking pressure points we didn't even know we had, breaking bones with surgical precision, turning our own warriors into screaming, broken things. The whole fight had lasted maybe 4 minutes. When it was over, Torres and his team had fought their way to the docking bay and escaped in their ship. But not before Torres had sent one transmission, broadcast across every frequency the station could receive. That was for Kate Murphy, he'd said, his voice cold and flat. You didn't kill her, but you tried. You disrespected her. You hurt her. She was our friend, our colleague, and you treated her like garbage. So understand this. You started this, And we're going to finish it. We still didn't understand. Not really. Torres and his team were clearly skilled. Sure, but they were 5 individuals. We were an empire spanning 200 systems. What could they possibly do? Oh, how naive we were. 2 weeks after Meridian Station, the human fleet arrived at Krell border outpost Gamma 7. Not a diplomatic ship. Not traders. A fleet. 16 warships that looked like someone had taken the concept of aggressive and given it physical form. All angles and armor and weapons ports that seemed to cover every possible firing angle. The outpost commander, a veteran named Krell, had laughed when he saw them on sensors. 16 ships against a fortified military outpost with defensive platforms and a garrison fleet of 30 vessels. He'd opened a channel to warn them off, to give them one last chance to retreat, before he obliterated them. The face that appeared on his screen had been that of a human female. Older, with silver hair pulled back severely and eyes that looked like frozen chips of Earth's oceans. Her uniform was crisp. Military covered in insignia we didn't recognize. "I'm Admiral Helen Vasquez of the Terran Defense Fleet," she'd said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "You are occupying the Meridian sector, which we are claiming as a human protectorate. You have 20 minutes to evacuate this outpost and withdraw all Krell forces from this region. Failure to comply will result in the complete destruction of all military assets in this sector." Krell had actually laughed out loud. You're giving us an ultimatum. With 16 ships, do you have any idea what you're facing?" Admiral Vasquez hadn't smiled, hadn't frowned. Her expression had remained absolutely neutral. 19 minutes and 30 seconds, Krell had cut the channel and ordered his fleet to attack formation. 30 warships against 16. Simple mathematics. Except humans, we learned that day, don't do simple mathematics. The human ships had moved unlike anything we'd ever seen. They didn't follow standard engagement patterns. They didn't maintain formation. They flowed like liquid metal, each ship supporting the others, creating overlapping fields of fire that turned space into a death trap. And their weapons. Oh, by the void, their weapons. They didn't just shoot at ships, they shot at specific parts of ships. Engines, weapons arrays, command decks. It was surgical, precise, terrifying. The battle had lasted 8 minutes. When it was over, 23 Krell warships were disabled or destroyed. 7 had managed to retreat, limping away with critical damage. The outpost itself had been reduced to debris, and the human fleet? They'd lost 1 ship. 1. The rest had barely been scratched. Admiral Vasquez had broadcast another message, this one to the entire sector. "This is your only warning. Leave human space. Leave now, or we will remove you." That was when High Commander Zalathrex had called the emergency council session that I was monitoring from my post on the Eternal Supremacy. That was when everything got real. "They're bluffing," Zalathrex had insisted, his multiple arms gesturing frantically. "One lucky battle doesn't make them invincible. We'll mobilize the core fleet, crush them completely, and remind the galaxy why nobody challenges the Krell Dominion." Military Coordinator Vextil, a grizzled veteran who'd been in service for 40 cycles, had shaken his head slowly. "High Commander, with respect, I've reviewed the battle data from Gamma 7. This wasn't luck. This was skill, training, experience. These humans fight like they've been at war for their entire existence." "Impossible," Zalathrex had snapped. "They've barely left their system. How could they possibly have that kind of military experience?" Vexit had pulled up data on the main display. "I had our intelligence division research human history. High Commander, these beings have been at war with each other for their entire recorded history. Thousands of years of continuous conflict. They've fought with sticks and stones. They've fought with chemical weapons and nuclear fire. They've nearly destroyed themselves multiple times and kept fighting anyway. War isn't something they do. War is something they are." The chamber had gone quiet. Really quiet. "Furthermore," Vexil had continued, his voice grim, "we've intercepted some of their internal communications. Do you know what they're calling this? Their military mobilization against us?" Nobody had answered. "They're calling it a police action. A minor deployment. They haven't even declared war yet. The fleet that destroyed Gamma 7. That's not their military. That's their colonial defense force. Their actual military, their real warships are still in their home systems." Zalathrex had stared at the display, his confident posture slowly deflating. "How many ships do they have?" "We don't know," Vextil had admitted. "But based on industrial capacity analysis, defensive installations we've detected, and production capabilities, Conservative estimate puts their total military fleet at somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 warships, and that's not counting their civilian vessels, many of which appear to be armed as well because humans apparently don't trust anyone, including each other. I'd felt something cold settle in my stomach at those numbers. The entire Krell Dominion had maybe 1,200 military vessels, and these humans had potentially 6,000. This is unacceptable, Zalthrex had declared, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. We'll negotiate. Offer them favorable trade terms. Technology exchange. Something to avoid further conflict. High Commander, I'd spoken up from my station, probably overstepping my authority but unable to stay silent. We have an incoming transmission. It's marked Priority 1, directed specifically to you. Zalthrex had gestured for me to put it through. The face that appeared on the main screen had been human, male, probably middle-aged by their standards. He'd had dark skin, gray hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen things that would break most beings. His uniform was different from Admiral Vasquez, more elaborate, covered in medals and insignia. High Commander Zalthrex, the human had said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. I am General Marcus Krell, Supreme Commander of the Terran Expeditionary Forces. I'm transmitting this message to inform you of the following facts. He'd paused, and in that pause, I'd felt the weight of something terrible about to happen. Fact 1, you attacked our diplomatic representative, Kate Murphy, imprisoned her, and attempted to intimidate our species into submission. Fact 2, you murdered our peace envoy David Torres and his security team at Meridian Station. They came in peace. You killed them in cold blood. Fact 3, you have been given multiple opportunities to withdraw peacefully and have refused each time. General Krell had leaned forward slightly and his expression had shifted from professional to something else. Something personal. David Torres was my friend. We served together for 15 years. He saved my life twice. He was a good man, a father of 3, and he believed, truly believed, that we could find peace with you. That we could coexist. That despite your aggressive posturing, despite your threats, you were reasonable beings who could be reasoned with. The general's hands had clenched into fists on his desk. He was wrong. And his children will grow up without a father because of your arrogance. Because you couldn't conceive of a universe where you weren't the apex predators, where you weren't the scariest things in the dark. He'd stood up and behind him I'd been able to see a massive operations center, filled with humans working at stations, displays showing fleet movements, tactical data, things we couldn't fully interpret. So, here's what's going to happen, General Krell had said, his voice dropping to something quiet and absolutely terrifying. You killed my friend first. You drew first blood. You started this war. And now, we're coming for you. Not to conquer. Not to enslave. We're coming to remove you as a threat to civilized space. We're coming to make sure you never hurt anyone. Ever again. The transmission had started to end, but Krell had added one more thing almost as an afterthought. Oh, and Zalthrex. We know where Krell Prime is. We know where every single one of your colony worlds is located. We know your fleet positions, your defensive capabilities, your industrial centers. We've been watching you for 3 years, gathering intelligence, preparing for the possibility that you'd do exactly what you did. You've had 3 years to be reasonable. That time is over. You have 72 hours to evacuate all civilian populations from military installations in fortified worlds. After that, we're coming in. And we won't stop until your empire is nothing but a memory and a warning to others. The transmission had ended. The council chamber had been absolutely silent for approximately 10 seconds. Then everyone had started shouting at once, panic and anger and fear mixing together in a cacophony of sound. I'd sat at my station staring at the blank screen where General Krell's face had been, and I'd realized something that made my blood run cold. The humans weren't angry. They weren't emotional. General Krell had delivered that entire message with the calm, professional demeanor of someone discussing quarterly economic projections. This wasn't rage. This wasn't revenge. This was policy. This was what humans did. And we'd just given them a reason to do it to us. The countdown had begun. 72 hours until the humans arrived. And I had the terrible certain knowledge that when they did, the Krell Dominion as we knew it would cease to exist. The 72 hours passed like watching a star slowly collapse in on itself. You know it's coming. You know it's inevitable, but you're helpless to stop it. High Commander Zalthrex spent the first 24 hours insisting we could still win. He mobilized every available warship, called in favors from allied species, fortified our defensive positions around Krell Prime. By the time the deadline approached, we'd assembled the largest battle fleet in Dominion history. 800 warships, all converging on our homeworld. Every captain was a veteran. Every crew was trained. Every weapon system was charged and ready. It should have been enough. It really should have been. I was still at my post on the Eternal Supremacy when the humans arrived. Not at the edge of the system like we'd expected. Not giving us time to form proper defensive lines and prepare our counterattack. They came out of faster-than-light travel directly above Krell Prime. All of them. At once. The sensor operator, a young Krell named Tixval, had stared at his display like it had personally betrayed him. "Sir, I'm reading multiple contacts." "No, wait. Dozens of contacts. Hundreds. Over 3,000 vessels just appeared in high orbit." 3,000. They'd brought 3,000 warships. Admiral Cortex, commander of the Eternal Supremacy and the entire defensive fleet, had gone very still. "That's impossible. Nobody can coordinate a jump that precise with that many ships. The navigational calculations alone would take weeks. The margin for error would be enormous. And yet they did it," I'd said quietly, watching the tactical display light up like someone had dumped stars across space. "They jumped an entire fleet directly into our defensive perimeter without scattering across half the system." The communication channels exploded with chatter. Every ship in our fleet reporting the same thing. Panic spreading like fire through dry vegetation. Ships breaking formation. Captains demanding orders. Admiral Cortex had stood there, all four of his arms hanging limply at his sides, and for the first time since I'd known him he'd looked defeated before the battle even started. "Hail them," he'd said finally, his voice hoarse. I'd opened the channel. The face that appeared wasn't General Cole. It was Admiral Vasquez again, the same woman who'd destroyed Gamma 7 Outpost. She looked exactly as she had before, calm, professional, utterly without mercy. "This is Admiral Helen Vasquez of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. Your 72 hours have expired. All Krell military vessels will power down their weapons and prepare to be boarded. Your government will surrender immediately and submit to transitional authority while we establish a new governing body. Failure to comply will result in the systematic destruction of all military assets in this system." Cortex had found his voice, though it shook slightly. "You cannot possibly believe we'll simply surrender. We have 800 warships. Battle stations. Orbital defenses. We will fight." Vasquez had tilted her head slightly and I'd seen something flicker across her face. Not anger. Something worse. Pity. "Admiral Cortex, I'm going to give you some information that your intelligence services apparently failed to provide. The engagement at Gamma 7, the one where we destroyed your outpost, we used that as a training exercise for our newer captains. The ships we deployed were from our Colonial Guard, crewed primarily by reservists and recent Academy graduates. This fleet, the one currently surrounding your planet, represents approximately 40% of our actual military strength. Every captain here has at least 10 years of combat experience. Every ship has been battle-tested in conflicts you've never heard of because they happened inside our own system before we achieved faster-than-light capability." She'd leaned forward slightly. "You have 800 warships. We have 3,000. Your crews have trained in simulations and maybe participated in 1 or 2 actual engagements against pirates or minor threats. Our crews have been fighting and dying in actual combat for decades. Your tactics are based on overwhelming force and intimidation. Ours are based on 3,000 years of continuous warfare and the absolute certainty that if we don't win, we die." The Admiral had paused, letting that sink in. "So I'm going to ask you one more time, Admiral. Power down your weapons. Surrender. Let's end this without more bloodshed. Or we can fight. And I promise you, when this is over, every single one of your ships will be debris and we'll still be here." Cortex had looked around the command deck. At his officers. At me. At the tactical display showing the impossible odds. I'd seen him calculating. Trying to find an angle, a strategy, something that would give us a chance. There wasn't one. We all knew it. But Zalthrex's voice had crackled over the fleet-wide channel before Cortex could respond. "All ships. This is High Commander Zalthrex. The Krell Dominion does not bow. We do not surrender. We fight. Attack pattern Delta 7. Show these primitives what happens when they challenge true power." Cortex had closed his eyes briefly and I'd heard him whisper something that might have been a prayer or a curse. Then he'd opened his eyes and started giving orders. The battle, if you could even call it that, lasted 18 minutes. Our ships moved into attack formation, exactly as drilled, exactly as practiced. Standard Krell tactics that had worked for 17,000 years. Overwhelming firepower, concentrated assault, break through their lines and target their command vessels. The humans didn't have lines. They moved like a living thing, like a school of those earth fish I'd seen in their cultural databases. thousands of individual units acting as one coordinated organism. When we concentrated fire on one section, they flowed around it. When we tried to break through, they compressed and reinforced. When we tried to retreat, they were already there, cutting off our escape routes. And their weapons. Sweet merciful void. Their weapons. They had missiles that could think, that actively evaded our defensive fire and found weak points in our shields. They had energy weapons that seemed to ignore our armor entirely, burning through hulls like they were made of paper. They had projectile weapons. Actual physical projectiles that traveled at relativistic speeds and hit with the force of small nuclear devices. But worse than the weapons was the coordination. Every human ship knew exactly where every other human ship was at all times. They never fired on each other, never got in each other's way, never blocked each other's. It was like watching 800 individual fighters trying to battle a single opponent with 3,000 arms. The Eternal Supremacy took the first hit 7 minutes into the battle. A missile volley that overwhelmed our point defense systems and detonated against our starboard hull. The entire ship shuddered. Alarms screamed. Damage reports flooded in. Hull breach on decks 15 through 20. Losing atmosphere. Casualty reports coming in. Sir, we've lost main weapons array 2 and shield generator 4. Cortex had gripped his command chair. Reroute power from secondary systems. Get those shields back up. Return fire on that cruiser. Coordinates marking now. We'd fired. Our weapons had lanced out beautiful streams of plasma that should have torn the human cruiser apart. They'd hit nothing. The ship had moved, just slightly, perfectly timed, and our shots had passed through empty space. Then 3 human destroyers had appeared from below us, weapons already firing, and the Eternal Supremacy had taken hits that made the first seem gentle. Around us the Krell fleet was dying. I'd watched on the tactical display as ship after ship winked out. Sometimes they exploded spectacularly. Sometimes they just went dark, power systems destroyed, life support failing, drifting in space waiting for rescue that might never come, and the humans kept coming. Relentless, precise, unstoppable. 12 minutes in, Admiral Cortex had ordered a general retreat. What was left of our fleet, maybe 200 ships still capable of movement, tried to disengage and jump out of the system. The humans had predicted that too. They'd positioned faster than light interdiction fields around every possible escape vector. We were trapped. Completely and totally trapped. At 15 minutes, High Commander Zalthrex's flagship, the Eternal Dominion, took a direct hit to its command deck. The transmission had cut out mid-order, his voice simply stopping as the entire upper section of the ship had been vaporized. The Krell Dominion's leadership, 17,000 years of tradition and power, had ended in a flash of light and superheated plasma. At 16 minutes, Admiral Cortex had looked at me with all 4 of his eyes, and I'd seen something there I'd never seen before. Acceptance. Understanding. The knowledge that this was the end. Open a channel, he'd said quietly. Fleet-wide. And to the humans, I'd done it, my hands shaking on the controls. This is Admiral Cortex of the Krell Defense Fleet. To all Krell vessels, cease fire immediately. Power down all weapon systems. We surrender. To the human fleet. We surrender. Please, stop the killing. We yield. The firing had stopped. Not gradually. Not ship by ship. Instantly. 3,000 human vessels ceased fire simultaneously, their weapons going cold in perfect coordination. Admiral Vasquez's face had appeared on my screen again. Admiral Cortex, your surrender is accepted. All Krell vessels will maintain current positions and await boarding parties. Any vessel that attempts to flee or power up weapons will be destroyed. Medical ships are being dispatched to assist with casualties. We will treat your wounded. Cortex had slumped in his command chair. Understood. The aftermath was almost worse than the battle. Human boarding parties, Marines in armor that made them look like walking tanks, had moved through our ships with brutal efficiency. They'd secured the command decks, weapons systems, engineering. But they'd also brought medical personnel who'd immediately started treating our wounded, not as prisoners, as patients. I'd watched in something like shock as a human medic, a young male with kind eyes, had carefully set the broken arm of a Krell soldier who minutes before had been trying to kill his comrades. The medic had worked with gentle precision, talking softly to calm the soldier, explaining what he was doing. You'll be okay, the medic had said. Compound fracture, but clean. We'll get you fixed up. You might even have full mobility back in a few weeks. The Krell soldier had stared at him with all 4 eyes. Why? We tried to kill you. We would have killed you if we could. The medic had paused, considering the question seriously. Because the fighting's over. Because you're hurt. Because I'm a doctor. And that's what we do. We help people. Even people who were shooting at us 5 minutes ago. That was when I started to understand something fundamental about humans. They weren't like us. They didn't conquer because they enjoyed domination. They didn't fight because they loved war. They fought because they were really, really good at it, and because they'd learned over thousands of years of killing each other that sometimes violence was the only language certain people understood. But once the fighting stopped, once you surrendered, they became something different. General Cole's face appeared on every screen across Krell Prime 3 hours after the battle ended. The planet's entire population, billions of Krell, watched as the human general who'd promised to destroy us addressed the conquered Dominion. People of the Krell Dominion. He'd begun, his voice carrying that same calm professionalism. Your government has surrendered. Your military has been defeated. Your empire, as it existed, is over. I know many of you are afraid, angry, confused. That's understandable. Let me tell you what happens next. He'd pulled up data displays behind him. First, all Krell prisoners of war will be treated according to the Geneva Conventions, a set of rules we humans developed to govern the treatment of combatants and civilians during warfare. You will not be tortured. You will not be executed. You will be fed, given medical care, and eventually repatriated once we've established a stable transitional government. Second, all civilian populations will be left alone. We're not here to enslave you or steal your resource. We're here to dismantle a government that thought murdering peace envoys was acceptable behavior. Cole had leaned forward, his expression intense. Third, and this is important, we're going to help you rebuild, not as subjects, not as vassals, as equals. We're going to provide humanitarian aid, medical supplies, food if needed. We're going to help you establish a representative government, one that doesn't threaten its neighbors or murder diplomats. We're going to share technology, trade agreements, cultural exchanges, everything we'd have offered, if you'd just been reasonable in the first place. He'd paused, letting that information process. I know this seems strange, incomprehensible even. You're probably wondering why we'd help the people who just tried to kill us. The answer is simple. We've been where you are. Humans have conquered each other countless times throughout our history. We've committed atrocities. We've made mistakes. We've learned, painfully and slowly, that vengeance doesn't end conflicts. It perpetuates them. Mercy, justice, and helping your former enemies become better than they were. That's how you build lasting peace. General Cole had stood up, his posture military perfect. You killed David Torres. You killed Angela Briggs, James Park, Thomas Gray. You killed good people who came in peace. That was unforgivable. But we're not going to kill you for it. We're going to make sure you never do it again, and then we're going to help you become something better than what you were. Because that's what humans do. We fight when we must. We show mercy when we can. And we ever forget our friends who died so that peace could be possible. The transmission had ended. I'd stood there on the bridge of the eternal supremacy, surrounded by human Marines who treated us with professional courtesy. And I'd felt something I never expected to feel, hope. 6 months later, I was working as a liaison officer for the transitional Krell government, helping coordinate between human advisors and Krell administrators as we built something new from the ruins of the Dominion. Elections were scheduled. Real elections where citizens voted for representatives. The concept was still strange to many Krell, but we were learning. I'd been assigned to work directly with a human colonel named Patricia Wu, helping establish communication protocols between species. She was patient, funny in a dry way, and absolutely brilliant at solving logistical problems. We'd been reviewing supply distribution schedules when she'd paused, looking at something on her datapad. Vexstar, can I show you something? I'd nodded, curious. She'd pulled up an image. It showed a human male, probably in his 40s, wearing a formal uniform, smiling at the camera. He had kind eyes and laugh lines around his mouth. That's David Torres, Wu had said softly. The man your government killed at Meridian Station. He was my mentor when I first joined the diplomatic corps. Taught me everything I know about negotiation, cultural sensitivity, patience. He used to say that peace was harder than war, because it required you to see your enemy as a person instead of a target. I'd looked at the picture, at the face of the man whose death had sparked a war that destroyed my entire civilization. I'm sorry, I'd said, meaning it. If I could change what happened, I would. He deserved better. Wu had nodded slowly. Yeah, he did. But you know what? He'd have loved what we're doing now. Building something new. Helping former enemies become friends. That's what he dedicated his life to. So in a way, we're finishing his work. She'd looked at me directly and I'd seen tears in her eyes but also determination. We came here for David, to make sure what happened to him never happened again. And we're staying for you, to help you build something worth having. That's the human way. We remember our dead by making the future better for the living. I'd sat there processing that, understanding finally why humans were the way they were. They'd spent thousands of years fighting each other, learning from every mistake, every tragedy, every senseless death. They'd developed weapons that could destroy planets and philosophies that valued every individual life. They were contradictions wrapped in flesh and determination. They could be the most terrifying warriors in the galaxy and the most compassionate healers. They could destroy an empire in 18 minutes and then spend years rebuilding it into something better. They were dangerous not because they were strong, though they were. They were dangerous because they never stopped trying to be better than they were. They never stopped learning. They never stopped caring. The Krell Dominion had lasted 17,000 years by being the strongest, most aggressive force in our region of space. Humanity had existed for maybe 200,000 years, and they'd spent most of it fighting themselves, learning from it, growing from it, becoming something terrifying and wonderful and absolutely unstoppable. We'd killed their friend first, and they'd come for us just as promised. But they hadn't come for revenge. They'd come to make sure no one else ever had to die the way David Torres died. To make sure the galaxy became a place where peace envoys could do their jobs without being murdered. To make sure we became better than we were. That was the real horror of humanity. Not their weapons. Not their tactics. Not their overwhelming military superiority. The real horror was that after defeating us completely, they made us want to be like them. And looking at Patricia Wu at the memorial to David Torres displayed on her desk, at the future we were building together, I realized something fundamental. Maybe that wasn't such a bad thing after all. Maybe, just maybe, the humans had been right all along. And if the Krell could learn that lesson, maybe there was hope for the rest of the galaxy too. The war was over. The real work was just beginning. And for the first time in my life I was actually looking forward to it.